Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Mormon Newscast. I'm Radio Free Mormon, joined by my capable co-anchors, Bill Reel and Rebecca Biblioteca. How are you both tonight?
Excellent.
Fantastic.
I'm really glad to hear it because we've got some incredible stories to get through. And the top story for tonight, let's see, is on the thumbnail. Today's date being March 9th, 2026. The LDS Church makes statement on Wade Christofferson. You may remember Wade is the brother of Todd, otherwise known as D. Todd Christofferson, the apostle and newly selected counselor in the first presidency. We'll go into that in some depth this evening as our top news story. After that, meetinghouse vandalism is a story we will cover. Then Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt update. New Eliza R. Snow book. BYU admissions boo-boo update. That was the mistake they made. Yeah, saying people could come in and be enrolled when they couldn't be. Face the history or avoid the cognitive dissonance. Utah makes Good Friday a state holiday. If you can believe that. The times, they are changing. And finally, new Q15 photo op. That's right, we've got some new kids on the block, so we have to update the photos for every ward building and local leader's office. That's probably ends up being a lot of pictures. But here's our top news story for today. From the Chicago Sun-Times, questions cloud Mormon church handling of suburban congregations, ex-leader accused of abusing minors. So that's a little bit ambiguous. If we unpack it a bit, you know what the Mormon church is. The suburban congregation is one there in Chicago, and it's called Crystal Lake. The ex-leader is Wade Christofferson, brother of D. Todd, and he has been accused of abusing minors. So questions cloud the Mormon church's handling of this whole thing. This is by Robert Herguth, March 5th, 2026. A member of a prominent Mormon family, i.e. the Christoffersons, who was arrested in Utah in recent months on child exploitation charges, previously lived in the Chicago area and for many years attended a congregation in the far northwest suburbs where he's accused of abusing other minors. Once again, that's Wade Christofferson they're speaking of. Questions are now being raised about whether local or even national Mormon leaders knew of that abuse but kept it secret, failing to tell police and providing cover that allowed child abuse to perpetuate. Wade Christofferson, who is in his early 70s, was arrested in November, charged with sexual exploitation crimes against minors, and accused in court records of molesting an Ohio child 15 to 20 times. A brother of an influential Mormon leader, Christofferson, that's Wade, also allegedly engaged in a sexually explicit FaceTime call with a second minor victim and sent coded letters to her Utah home that referenced sexual activity, federal prosecutors allege. Wade Christofferson also committed hands-on sexual abuse of that child as well, per the federal prosecutors. While that court case focuses on more recent accusations of sexual abuse out of state, out of Illinois, this being the Chicago Sun-Times, Christofferson is accused of molesting other children years earlier while a member and leader of a Mormon congregation in Crystal Lake. And they also give the full name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, just in case anybody doesn't know what Mormon means. Initially, he was excommunicated by the church for that behavior, according to interviews, but he was later allowed to return as a full member and leader. And subsequent abuse happened. Allegedly, a one-time member of Christofferson's McHenry County congregation, former Woodstock resident Edward Natchell, told the Chicago Sun-Times that he was part of the church tribunal, the High Council, that convened in the mid-1990s over allegations that Christofferson Wade molested at least one child at a slumber party hosted by one of his children. So Wade has one of his kids hosting a slumber party. It's in the 1990s, and he uses that as a pretext to abuse a child. And so he gets excommunicated. This High Council ends up excommunicating him in 1996, is what I believe the testimony is from Ed Natchell. While church leaders subsequently excommunicated Christofferson over the alleged misconduct, they apparently never went to police or told their flock. So they never went to police, apparently. It was covered up. And they never told the members of the ward so that they could check with their kids and see if they had been victimized as well. So this says, and Christofferson Wade was allowed to continue being a part of the congregation, though with a downgraded status. That was for 1 year, apparently, until he was rebaptized in 1997. By the way, at this point, Rebecca, do you have any comments you want to make at this point, and Bill too?
I think I would just say that what you just described as far as how they handled it, a quiet excommunication without any information making it out to the public. Someone in the comments said, I wish this sounded like that was rare, but that sounds like typically what happens, because there's a lot of emphasis and focus on the perpetrator as somebody that needs to repent, right? Got to keep it quiet. He can continue to attend. We have to help him with the spirituality. They do not often consider the victim or potential victims like you described. The other parents should have been made aware, because there could have been situations that they needed to talk to their kids about.
Yeah, we go to the earlier moments where this story hit the press, per se. And dealing with this news, you heard the rumblings, as you're pointing out, Rebecca, that he was allowed to, on some level, either he's telling the ward or the leaders of the ward are communicating that what he's in trouble for is having an affair. And in a world where there are abusers and there are victims, allowing the abuser to cover their rear end by creating a false reason that isn't really threatening to anyone else in the ward, when the real reason should have every parent taking precautions. This is the system. When we say this system protects abusers, this is one clear instance of how it does so.
Yeah, and this guy's getting he's starting to get a lot of national recognition, this story, mainly because of who his brother is. I mean, if it weren't for his brother, this would be another dime a dozen, child molest and cover up by the church. So I completed that slide. That is also another picture there, apparently, of the ward building, I believe, in Crystal Lake. Now, this is Ed Natchell, Nachel. He was interviewed on Mormon Stories by John DeLynn. He says he was on the High Council that excommunicated Wade Christofferson back in 1996. He's been watching the news. He's seen what's happened, that he has been accused of reoffending as recently as just a few months ago. And now he feels badly about it, because maybe if he had done something more, maybe this would have been avoided. So here's what he says. No authorities were brought in. And by that, I don't know. Does he mean, church authorities or law authorities? Either one, I think. No authorities were brought in. Nothing was ever mentioned to the membership, Natchell said, adding that a rumor was allowed to persist. A rumor was allowed to persist that Christofferson's discipline had to do with an extramarital affair. That's what you were talking about, Bill. It is interesting how the church will allow rumors to persist when it benefits them, such as the apostles personally seeing Jesus Christ in order to be a special witness. I can't think of a better way to describe it than what he said here. He adds, nothing was ever done to dissuade this guy from doing this stuff. I'm sorry, Bill, something?
No, I'm just shaking my head in the affirmative of the points you're making.
Yeah. Rebecca?
I'm pulling an RFM in the first 10 minutes of the show. I was going to say, just again, not a rare occurrence. I do not think people just sort of have a little bit of discipline, get right with God, work on their spirituality. No care or thought is given to the wake that they left around them when they did what they did.
And can I just stress how important it is that Ed Nachel came forward? It's Nachel, and I can't remember how to say it correctly. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, but I want to do you justice because it's so important that you came forward. Because without you blowing the whistle on this whole thing, the church is allowed then to recede into the bushes and into the background and have that plausible deniability that they love so much. But what Ed is doing is taking that away from them. And I'm glad he's doing that. And everybody else who is on that council should be doing the same thing. At some point, Wade Christofferson was rebaptized and he moved to Ohio. So he's in Illinois, right? Gets excommunicated in 1996. He's going to get rebaptized in 1997 is my information. Then he's going to move to Ohio. Now he's a member who's just moved over there and he's going to resume leadership roles in the church. After being excommunicated for child sexual abuse. And the story says it was apparently without rank and file church members being told of his past. So he moves over into Ohio. He's a blank slate. Hey, guess who my brother is? And he is greeted, with great welcome. And they're happy to have him. They have no idea that this is a guy that they need to keep their kids away from. It's unclear who signed off on Christofferson's return, and that's going to be one of the things that's going to hang the tail on. This is a complicated story. There's a lot of different angles to it, which is one of the reasons I'm going to really rely on Rebecca and Bill here as we go on. It's unclear who signed off on Wade Christofferson's return into church. Would that have been done normally? It doesn't sound that abnormal, the way the church handles things, which is so abysmal, that it wouldn't necessarily need his brother, who's a general authority, to sign off for him. I think he was a 70 at the time, or maybe he was a 12, but he was still a general authority. I don't know. But it raises the question, Rebecca.
Yeah, can I just add, we did cover this on the newscast a couple of months ago. It does take first presidency approval to take an annotation off of a record and reinstate like that. So there is a subcommittee that looks at it, but then it takes first presidency approval to remove an annotation. So how exactly that fits with reinstatement after excommunication, I'm not sure. But he could have been reinstated and then that could have been removed after the fact. Those things are not clear.
And I'm not trying to give the church any cover here, but I have often wondered how much rubber stamping goes on.
Exactly.
With the first presidency when it has all these things it has to do and they just delegate it out to some other little committee to do it for them. But I don't know why it is. I mean, wouldn't somebody go to Todd, and say, hey, I heard this thing about your brother? Nobody does that because Todd's story is going to be that he didn't know anything about it until 6 years ago. So this happens. He's excommunicated. His own brother is excommunicated in 1996. And I guess there's a rumor out that it's adultery. But Todd Christofferson is so incurious about his brother and why he was excommunicated from the LDS church, which had to do with child sex abuse. And we know there are allegations of a lot of members of the family, too. This is running rampant within the Christofferson family, apparently because of Wade, that he didn't know until 2020. He didn't know until 6 years ago. So in other words, 24 years after his brother gets excommunicated, he finally finds out why it was that it happened. Now, it's possible, it's conceivable. These are things that people do try and keep secret, right? It's just, really? You didn't find out from anybody in your family, and you didn't find out from anybody in the church who was involved in processing the request for Wade to get rebaptized in 1997? I don't know. What do you think, Rebecca?
Well, we also covered this on the newscast a couple months ago that Todd himself was in charge of PR for the church, a department where they kind of keep their ear to the ground as far as things that might be brewing out there that could be negative for the church. So area reps would report to this department, hey, this is happening or this and that. I would think that the name Christofferson, if it were in any way linked to any kind of court proceeding, might be, sent up the chain to this department. And my source explained that they keep data, spreadsheets, they really track these things, something that might be out there ready to rear its ugly head and hurt the church. So my personal opinion is there's no way D. Todd, being one of the ones in charge of this department and also just knowing how to get information like this, that he would not be aware. Also, the fact that the Christofferson family has publicly said in news stories they are so close. These are news stories where they're talking about the brother Tom Christofferson, but they talk about being so close and being there for each other. I just find it really implausible, but that's just me and my personal opinion. I will say that.
Okay. Hey, Bill, did you want to add something? I think it's still the same slide, but we've talked quite a bit.
I'll just add one quick thing. I don't see any reason why, when someone's brought into a disciplinary council and admits they did the thing they've been accused of, it seems clear to me that Christofferson confessed and repented. Why would we ever remove an annotation from a child molester ever? Why would we not clearly denote that asterisk means that he has confessed to child sexual abuse and should never be allowed to be around children again? It's a simple thing to do. For some reason, this church doesn't do that.
And I think it has something to do with their miscomprehension of what it means to be wired in this way. That it's something that is a choice, I think, is what is behind it. Whatever thought goes into it, it's like any other sin. It's a choice, and therefore you can choose to not do it. Well, yes, you can choose to not do it, but you can't choose that. You can't change your wiring if you're wired this way. At least that's what I think the studies tell us. It's not something that can be cured or rectified. It's only something that can be guarded against. And the way the church handles things is the worst way possible if they're thinking about the interests of the kids. Going on with the story, Natchell said Christofferson's recent arrest in Utah, once again, this is the high councilman who was there when he was excommunicated in 96. His recent arrest in Utah spurred him to speak up. He said he took his oath seriously at the time of the tribunal, that the proceedings and outcome were supposed to be secret. So there's part of the oath you take. I've never been part of one of these tribunals, Bill. I don't know. I guess you've been present at one, but maybe they take the oath before the victim arrives. That you take an oath that you keep everything there secret. I can see that as being a good thing in many cases for privacy's sake, but in other cases, it seems to, help the church out.
It seems like the default is to have confidentiality. As a bishop who did disciplinary courts at the local level, the ward level, there was an understanding, and I can't again quote it, but I'm assuming the handbook spoke to it, and that there were very rare exceptions for where things should be talked about outside of that. So I would assume the stake operates the same way.
Yeah. So they were supposed to keep it a secret, and he took his oath seriously, but he also says that had he or others spoken up long ago, perhaps they could have stopped 30 years of alleged abuse since then. Yeah. See, that's the other side of this oath of secrecy. Natchell, who moved from the Chicago region to Utah in 2018, said he harbors guilt over what happened and has gone on Facebook to apologize to victims and families for not doing more sooner. Current leaders of the Crystal Lake Mormon Church could not be reached, probably because they were calling the church and nobody was there. Crystal Lake police records show a female accuser came forward in 2022. This is of significance. In 2022, alleging abuse at the Crystal Lake Church. Now, this is the reporting, okay? Alleging abuse at the Crystal Lake Church. That's important language when it comes to liability. By Christofferson years earlier when she was a child. So this probably would have been back in the first half of the 1990s before he moved to Ohio. Criminal charges weren't pursued because the alleged assault occurred long enough ago that the statute of limitations had expired, records show. Now, Bill, you found this. Can you tell us what this is?
we were just talking about, before the show started, where Crystal Lake is. Crystal Lake First Ward, you had assumed correctly it was in Illinois. Crystal Lake First Ward, Crystal Lake, Illinois. And you see the address down there at the bottom on looks like 480 North Walkup Road.
Okay, very good. Now, everybody, things have been, difficult enough up to now. They're going to get a little bit more difficult for the next 5 minutes. I want to give you warning. We're going to look at a selection from the police report from that 2022 report that we're talking about here. So we're going to go to that now, and I'm going to read through it. Okay. Everybody who wants to leave should have been able to leave by now. While continuing to investigate, this is from the police report. You can see it's redacted. While continuing to investigate this incident, I spoke with blank by phone on June 9th, 2022. I told blank our conversation was being recorded on my body-worn camera, which he understood. The following is a summary of that conversation and may or may not be in correct order. Blank advised all the incidents. Blank. Now that's a pronoun. Look, I'm going to presume that this is a girl. It doesn't have to be, but otherwise it's going to be very difficult to read and make no sense. But blank advised all the incidents she was about to describe took place at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Blank blank advised these incidents started when she was about 4 to 5 years old and ended approximately age 8. She explained the incidents were not frequent, but happened several times during those ages above. A line is redacted. She advised Wade was also a member of the church and was in some way a part of the leadership team. She said the church is run mostly on volunteers, and she was not sure exactly what Wade's job was during that time. I'm sure church records would reveal that. Then another long line is redacted. She remembers sitting on a chair in the room. It doesn't say here what room. Is this in a bishop's office? Is it a room at church? That's important. Remember sitting on a chair in the room and Wade asking her if she, they missed that she, it is a girl, if she was being a good girl before inserting his finger or fingers inside the vagina. She said Wade never made her do anything to him that she remembers. So he never had her do anything to him. And that's usually what you can imagine. In other words, he was doing things to her. And that all she could recall was Wade using his fingers to assault her. She believes the last time this happened to her was around 8 years of age. She said she was not sure why the abuse stopped, but that it had just stopped one day. Another line is redacted, then several lines are redacted. She learned that Wade had been excommunicated from the church in the 1990s. She was not sure what it was for, but believed it to be related to him touching children. She said Wade did not confirm or deny the allegations against him, but continued to apologize to her for what happened. So apparently she had confronted him at some point. He admitted to her that he at one point was excommunicated from the church, but has been rebaptized and is a full member. Wade told her that he believed he was forgiven for what he did. See full recorded interview for further details. Okay, so that's from the police report. Any thoughts about that, Bill? And then we'll go to Rebecca.
Like so much abuse that we cover here on the newscast and other content that the three of us create, this church is its own worst enemy. When there's, again, you guys have said it, when there's so much secrecy, you allow things like this to then show up again to some other kid and show up again to some other kid and show up again to some other kid. Because every time someone like Wade moves from one ward to another and the past incident is relayed as being an affair, then that person gets to start from scratch with no one having any concern about a child in his space. This church has a lot to repent of and to change. And I'm using the word repent in the terms of changing and having transformation. This church has to stop making excuses. To the interview that you're talking about with Nachel, it's really him coming out and doing this interview that the church now has to respond to it. They weren't going to respond without that. The only reason they're addressing it is because it's making waves in the media. The church would like to say nothing about this, just like it would like to say nothing about Wade Christofferson in the beginning of this whole thing. It really wants to always cover things up, sweep things under the rug, and it's got to make significant changes if it really wants to say it protects children.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I just think about all the touch points in this story where somebody could have made other people aware, and all the children that could have been saved, all the pain, all the heartache. And I don't think we even really know everything that Wade has done, because the idea that there's a, almost 3 decades long gap between, some of his behaviors, we know in the 90s, and then we know again the most recent stuff with the FaceTime. There's no way in my mind that there's an almost 30-year gap with a man like this. And so I just look at all the failures from people that want to keep it private, be it church leaders or other people, where no one is thinking of the children or parents that need to be warned. And that's a systemic problem, and that continues. But yeah, I don't know how you feel, but I just feel that 30-year gap, it was not a gap. I believe that other things happened. We're just not aware yet.
Yeah, so this is what is happening now behind the scenes, unbeknownst to me or any of us. And all the while this is happening, here comes Brother D. Todd Christofferson moving up the leadership rungs of the church. And he's a 70, and then he's called to be an apostle. And then just a few months ago, he's called to be in the first presidency. And this starts raising the question. This is bad enough. This is horrible enough. But what did D. Todd Christofferson know? And when did he know it? And what, if anything, did he do about it when he did know? That's the question I think that people are thinking. I think that's the reason that this statement was released. And we'll go through that statement here in a second as well. The allegations relating to Wade Christofferson's November arrest indicate he wrote letters to one of the child victims with messages labeled as top secret, with coded words for body parts, telling the Utah victim it was nice to see Snow and her friends when we FaceTimed. Remember, that's what happened, and the dad saw it and got wise to it and grabbed the phone, and that's what broke this whole thing open. And I believe that was last November, 2025. Wade Christofferson also allegedly wrote, "I can't wait to see you and play games. I have a new one to teach you called School. You will like it." His phone's online history revealed searches for criminal defense attorneys, sex crimes, Columbus, Ohio. And in Ohio, do clergy have to report child abuse confessions, according to federal authorities? You're nodding there, Bill.
Only because this plays exactly into how the church handles this. When you call the helpline, the lawyers on the other end look up your state, and they decide if your state allows you to report or not report. They are often telling the bishop or the leader calling in to tell the to not report it, that the abuser did something, and to tell their abuser that they don't need to report it, that the repentance can be handled in-house. And this is clearly showing that Wade Christofferson, an abuser, is trying to figure out if he also gets to take advantage of that loophole.
I think that's true, because I think the two things that are pretty much indisputable, though still just alleged in this case, are one, that he is a historical, a serial child sex abuser, allegedly, but I think that's what it indicates. And also that he's a faithful Mormon. In other words, he believes that the repentance is important for his salvation and getting it done through a bishop, etc. Okay, well, let's go ahead. I mean, he got rebaptized and everything, right? Became leadership roles. After that, Floodlit, an organization that chronicles sexual abuse within Mormonism, found, after speaking to multiple survivors or relatives of survivors, that Wade Christofferson has at least 7 to 10 alleged victims from the Crystal Lake Church jurisdiction in the 1980s and 1990s. Floodlit also reported that D. Todd Christofferson, Wade Christofferson's brother, who is a high-ranking Mormon official known as an apostle, knew in or about 2018 of at least one abuse allegation, citing information from an accuser. So Floodlit, among the people that they interview, they find one who says that D. Todd knew about an allegation in or about 2018. That becomes important. And that also is something that reaches out and touches Wade Christofferson, and through him touches the church, and may also be one of the reasons that this statement was released. A Latter-day Saints spokesman in Utah released a statement to the Sun-Times saying, so this is a statement that's apparently not on the church newsroom. I looked, I didn't find it. Is it there, or is this just a statement they handed out to the Sun-Times? Kind of like there was a statement they handed out to Vice magazine or whatever that was about Tim Ballard.
Yeah, I can speak to that because as we all shared this article around, we're reading it and I'm looking at it and I see this, a couple. I mean, it's kind of buried in the article. It's just kind of down there. Nobody who was not LDS would understand what this means, that the church spokesman actually spoke on Wade Christofferson and D. Todd Christofferson. So I created this image here. I just kind of grabbed that statement out so that, if people didn't want to read the whole article, or if they hadn't focused on this, that they could see how this statement is so important, because it does clearly say a church spokesman gave this statement to this newspaper. And here it is. And this is unusual. It is like Tim Ballard. You're right. Kind of in the paper, but nowhere else.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to go through each of these paragraphs. Here is the thing that you made, that meme that has the entirety of the church statement in it. I've broken it down into paragraphs for each slide, so we can go through them paragraph by paragraph, and I'm going to want your input, both of you, after each one. First paragraph of the church statement. The church strongly condemns and does not tolerate abuse and honors the courage and respects the rights of survivors. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's get to the real reason that we're issuing this. Regarding the history of Wade Christofferson, President D. Todd Christofferson was never in a position to know about, and in fact, did not know about or influence the ecclesiastical decisions regarding his brother's membership. Any comments there, Rebecca?
Well, just the fact that they have to come out and say it is incredible. It reminds me also of Bo Euler, right? The bishop who appeared and said there's a hotline, appeared on Mormon Stories, and the church names him by name. Bo Euler, not telling the truth statement. Here's another statement where they name people by names. It's, again, the Streisand effect. But listen to what it says here. It says he was never in a position to know about, and in fact did not know about or influence the ecclesiastical decisions. So, I mean, they're talking about he didn't know about the court, and he didn't know exactly what happened, but does that really say that he didn't, after the fact, know eventually that his brother had done something or had been excommunicated? I just find it wiggly words the whole way through.
Okay, very good. Bill?
I think this is the lesser of the important things, and the other one is the one they're not covering, which is somebody in the first presidency did know. D. Todd Christofferson likely wouldn't have been obviously in the first presidency at the time. Maybe not even an apostle when this happened, perhaps. But somebody in the first presidency gave some sort of approval, even if they gave permission to an underling to rubber stamp a bunch of these at any given moment in the church. Saying that D. Todd Christofferson didn't know what was going on, when we know an annotation, again, that's what's being alleged anyway, that an annotation was removed, indicates that somebody in the first presidency did know. And I want you to notice that no one in this letter wants to address that point, because that's the elephant in the room that they're hoping nobody asks a specific question about.
Do you think it makes any difference that it would have been the first presidency from 96 or 97 when he was excommunicated and then reinstated?
I think it makes a huge difference that somebody in the first presidency who's supposed to be led by the Spirit of God, by the Spirit of discernment, have the Holy Ghost with them, and be a prophet, seer, and revelator, gave approval for a child molester to have their annotation cleared, and then that person continued to molest kids.
And we do know that it was removed because he was in 3 bishoprics starting, I believe it was 2006, when he was back in the swing of things. So it had to be removed at some point for him to be in those bishoprics.
Yes. Good point. Thank you. While he and other, this is continuing with the statement from the church. While he, Wade, and other family members were accused, that's got to be D. Todd, right? Okay, so that's D. Todd Christofferson. While he, D. Todd, and other family members were told of Wade's excommunication, they were told about the fact he got excommunicated back in 1996. He, D. Todd, was not informed of the specific reasons and had no reason to suspect it was for abuse. So this is saying back in 1996, when his own brother gets excommunicated from the church that I think that D. Todd is pretty committed to, and he thinks that's a pretty big deal, that I guess he never really inquired, or if he did, he was fed the story. It was about adultery. He never knew it was for child sex abuse, and no reason to suspect it was for abuse. What do you think about that, Rebecca?
I know there's sort of a conspiracy theory out there. Why are there ellipses in this statement? Do you see those there? Those are in the statement.
And I don't
I don't know
understand
what
because it's the church's statement. They're not quoting anybody in the statement. The reason it's in quotation marks is because the Chicago Sun-Times is showing that this is the church's statement. So the only person that I can think of that would make any sense to have ellipses in there would be the Chicago Sun-Times, because they're the ones quoting it. And I've got no idea why they would do that. What do you think about it, Rebecca? Do you have any idea?
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of a conspiracy theory. Did they leave something out? Are they trying to say something but not saying it? Again, I just feel in the positions that D. Todd was in, he would have been aware. He would have had access to excommunication records. And it says here he was not informed. As Bill says, people higher up would have known. Either they were concealing it from him, or he was trying to keep it close to the vest and not tell others. I'm not sure, but my personal opinion, I'll say that again, is that he would have been aware.
And Bill, I'll just note that Tim Rathbone is helping us out by showing that D. Todd was a 70 from April 1993. He reports to April 2008, at which time he must have become an apostle. And then just last December, he was moved into the first presidency.
RFM, if you were to become an apostle and your brother was excommunicated in the LDS church, wouldn't you take a peek? Wouldn't you look to see what happened to your brother? Wouldn't you just type in your username and password and look him up? And if no one's ever shared it with you, wouldn't you be curious?
I just walk down the hall or down to the basement and talk to Poetic Kate. It's not like this is hard for them to figure out. These guys are the masters of the keys. Now, he was a 70 then, but then he becomes an apostle, and who says he can't do it as a 70? Come on. They have membership, and membership has its privileges, and part of that is finding out what's going on and why people get excommunicated. It's your brother, and nobody told him. Look, what I'm saying is it's possible. It's kind of difficult to believe under the circumstances.
Can I just make one more point? I also feel that when you make somebody an apostle in the church, you scrutinize their lives and connections and families. I think this happens. I've talked to people who have been called to stake presidents, and an apostle will come in and say, is there anything in your associations or family, something that could hurt or reflect negatively on the church? I just feel before they make someone an apostle that they would look at family connections. They certainly knew he had a brother who was gay, right? And they use that all the time. They certainly knew about Tom Christofferson. I just feel like if there were things on the records, very easy to find in-house when you're vetting someone to become the future prophet. That's what you are when you're an apostle. So I think there would have been some kind of scrutiny, at least in 2008, when he was in the process of being vetted. Of course, I know everyone thinks the Lord just calls them, but in my mind, they're going to scrutinize these men.
This was a huge mistake. And so we also have to think, would not President Oaks know when he called him to be in the first presidency in last December about this problem? We don't know. He should have known. If he did not know, then his entire staff was not doing its due diligence and should be fired, because this is causing a real problem with the image of the church. And it's exploding now, I think, across the internet and across the media. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, the church has got to recognize, I've said this so many times in the last 6 months, this is a church that was founded by a person who preyed upon children. Then after his death, it was managed by people, generation after generation, the next 4 or 5 leaders of the church, who also have huge discrepancies in age between them and the children or extremely young adults that they cozied up to. If this church wants to rid itself of the image of not protecting children and having that foundation that it does, it might want to think twice about taking some more serious, significant steps in changing the church culture so that it does, in fact, protect children.
Amen. It was not until around 2020. Now, this is the church statement continuing, and I don't know if this 2020 is supposed to line up with that 2018 comment or police report. Now, it was not until around 2020 that President Christofferson, D. Todd, first learned of, through family disclosure, some of his brother's history of abuse from 30 years earlier. So the claim is he never knew anything about it, not even a hint, until 2020, when some adult family member disclosed to him that this had happened to him or her when they were a child. He, D. Todd, respected the adult victim's wishes not to involve law enforcement at that time. So this is the explanation for why he didn't report it to police, because they didn't want to report it to law enforcement. But this will all change now in the next part of the statement, where he becomes Mighty Mouse and leaping to the phone to call 911 as soon as he finds out about the newest allegation. And they claim it was D. Todd who called the cops. However, the statement goes on. However, upon learning of a recent allegation involving a minor, President Christofferson immediately reported it to legal authorities. Period. End of quote. I'm having trouble imagining what that even looks like. Bill, what do you think? Do you think he picked up the phone and called the cops?
I think there are lots of scenarios here where he might walk away from a conversation with his brother, wanting to protect him, and reaching out to others could easily see that this was going to backfire if there was too much risk in doing that. And at that point, maybe somebody encouraged him to call authorities. Maybe he sought out the counsel of Curtin and McConkie, for instance. It's really a strange thing to believe every twist and turn in this story benefits the LDS church when that same church avoids putting really simple processes and procedures in place in order to protect kids to the fullest extreme that they could.
Thank you. Rebecca, when we were talking about this story earlier, you mentioned that this sounds like it might conflict with an earlier news report about who it was who called the police.
Yeah, it's true. There was an earlier report, and I need to look this up, that said one of the fathers of the victims is who called. But I will say, when I hear even the statement on the slide prior to this one, how heartbreaking for this family. You have an adult, it might have been a nephew of D. Todd, might have been a niece, who says there was abuse, and they all decide, instead of talking to the family or warning parents, warning great nieces, great nephews, telling anybody, and they keep it secret. And it's so heartbreaking because then it continues to happen. I think this happens in families. You just don't talk about it. But I do find the whole scenario interesting that D. Todd called the police. And of course, I've explained my sort of theory of how I think things might have happened. You know, you have the FaceTime call in Utah. And then you have articles that said that that father then conferred with a father in Ohio or Illinois, I think Ohio. Yeah.
Ohio.
And Ohio. And, and I, of course, assume these are all family members. That would explain the access everywhere. And then suddenly there's a couple days that go by, as it talks about in the article. Then you have Wade himself traveling to Utah. And then you have this statement that D. Todd is the one that picked up the phone. I imagine in between all of this, there was consultation within the family. There was the thought that Uncle D. Todd is an apostle. There was consultation with Curtin McConkie. Again, my personal opinion, I'm just guessing. Crafting a scenario, a war room perhaps, to discuss what do we do. And the best scenario, if he indeed did call, is to have him call so that they can make a statement like this about D. Todd. But I think it was crafted. I think it was curated as far as what happened with the church in mind. Again, just my personal opinion, but when I read those articles, some of the things don't quite fit. At least authorities were finally called. But I think there was sort of a process and a lot of people talking behind the scenes with the church in mind.
Your thoughts, Bill?
I'm still going back to, the Sun Times here puts out the church's statement, doing them a favor, putting out what the church has said, what they want to say, and not being questioned further about what they don't want to say. I think it's a strange, and I know this happens all the time. It's not just in news around Mormonism, but I think it's a strange thing when you publish one side's official statement. It's what they clearly want to put out there, without any real ability for that entity to be able to ask the church back and forth questions.
Mm-hmm.
I still want to know, and the church could answer this question: was an annotation removed from D. Todd Christofferson's record? And if yes, or if you stammer, if you refuse to answer, who in the first presidency gave the approval for that to happen?
That's why if there are some things or any things that you want to hide or not to be open about, a press release is always the best way to go, because it can't be cross-examined instead of having somebody get out there and start talking and be able to be asked questions. Good point. And I made this slide only because I thought, well, what is the chronology of this? I think you're right, Bill, because February 25th, 2026, the Mormon Stories airs its interview with Ed Natchell. March 5th, 8 days later. So a little better than a week later, the church releases its statement to the media that we've been going over. Now, here's a comment that I had, okay? And I want to proceed it with this one. So before I forget this one, the next one's on the slide. One would think that President Oaks would have known this about the baggage. He may have thought it was old news, but it's still baggage. He was the Chief Justice on the Utah Supreme Court, which people keep throwing around to show how smart he must be, and realize the implications of this and the potential hazards of this, of having him in the first presidency in case his brother decides to get caught again. And it happened. So either President Oaks knew it, which I think is the more likely scenario. And if he did, what does that say about his, not just spirit of discernment, but just, intelligence of making a choice? Because that's a bad choice. This would be the worst choice of anybody. Well, Bednar's always the worst choice, but this would be the second worst choice next to Bednar. Of anybody in the Quorum of the 12. He's the guy who'd be the last picked on any baseball team. D. Todd Christofferson, because of the baggage he brings to the game. Or if, for whatever reason, President Oaks did not know, Elder Christofferson did not bring it up. And I've got to think that would cause some friction in the relationship. Okay, so here's the last thought. 2 issues. I think there's 2 issues here. This is the way I'm looking at it, okay? There's the issue that Wade Christofferson was excommunicated for child abuse. The real reason was hidden. It was not reported to police. Wade was rebaptized a year later and put in leadership positions again and reoffended thereafter. That's the first issue. The second issue is, did D. Todd Christofferson know about it and facilitate the cover-up and or facilitate the rebaptism of his brother Wade in any way. Those are two distinct issues in my mind. To my mind, the first issue, the one that has nothing to do with D. Todd, the first issue is more important than the second because it speaks of systemic failure to protect children throughout the church rather than just, and I use that word only for rhetorical effect, rather than just a one-off because an apostle happens to be his brother. Both are bad, but I think the first is the worst because you're going to have a lot more victims. And yet the church's statement focuses on the second issue of clearing D. Todd Christofferson from wrongdoing while tacitly admitting this is just the way the church conducts business on a regular basis. Wade did not have to have an apostle for a brother according to the church. The church would have hidden it anyway and let the children be re-victimized or new children victimized. They don't just cover up and protect and then readmit child predators if they happen to be apostles' brothers. They do it for pretty much every child predator. That's how I'm reading this statement from the church. Let me go to you, Bill, first for your thoughts, and then Rebecca.
Yeah, there was a thing that came out maybe a year ago or so, and it made its rounds around the internet, which was asking women whether if they met a bear or a man in the woods. And most women will choose to encounter a bear. And I thought, this Crystal Lake thing in Illinois, of course, Crystal Lake, Camp Crystal Lake is the background for Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. Camp Crystal Lake. So
I've never seen one of those.
So in my mind, I'm wondering sort of the same kind of question. You have a bunch of kids at Camp Crystal Lake, and they can either encounter Jason Voorhees or they can encounter Wade Christofferson, who also operated in Crystal Lake. Just as sort of a one-off here, child molesters do so much damage. And this is a system that even on the innocent side gives people who claim to repent, it gives them forgiveness and allows them to go forward and assumes that they're cleaned up their act and they're never going to do it again. Best case scenario on the church's part, if we grant as much benefit of the doubt for it behaving in a way that it thinks is truly appropriate. That's best case. Worst case scenario is this is a system that prides itself on being able to protect those that it rubs shoulders with, the friends of leaders, the relatives of leaders. It seems to resist wanting to make the changes that would easily protect children to a further extent. And this is a system that seemingly, if the right person comes along and request happens for their annotation to be cleared, someone in the first presidency sees it as appropriate to allow a child molester to go forward, once again serving in spaces where they will interact. Because the church didn't make the change to require 2 adults in the room with a child, they have hereby granted leaders that they've allowed to be seen as forgiven to go back into rooms one-on-one with children and abuse again. This church, in other words, they're creating a space in 2 different places when both of those policies and procedures actually statistically increase the kinds of abuse that can happen. So on one hand, when you say we'll remove annotations, and on the other hand, we're not going to force there to be 2 adults or more in a room with children, you've now created a double-edged sword that abuses the child to a greater extent in each time that happens.
Very good. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just think, like I said before, there is little or no awareness of what CSA really is. The fact that it's similar to adultery. We'll just say adultery, when we all know the ramifications of understanding what CSA is are far greater than adultery as far as additional victims and additional harm. I just think they do not have an understanding, and they're not capable. And I'll give you just one example. As I was looking into all of this Wade stuff and podcasting about it, I did talk to a former stake president, I've mentioned this before, to find out about the annotation and what's that all about, who's annotated, how is it removed. And just in conversation, I said, have you ever removed one? Have you ever had one removed? This is a nice guy I'm talking to, a nice guy, a former stake president. He goes, yeah, one time. I did it once. And it was a guy that, he was arrested for CSA, and it was a long time ago. It was like 13 years later. And I really wanted him to work with the boys. And I knew that his arrest had been for a girl. So I went ahead and requested the annotation be removed. And then it went through the process, and it was. And again, this is the nicest guy, but there is no understanding, right? No understanding of what it really means. So someone in the chat just said, you think there's more awareness? I think there is. I think perhaps the post-Mormon community is driving this, because we are trying to hold their feet to the fire. And that slide you had before, where you had Ed on Mormon Stories, I wonder if he had not been on Mormon Stories and then the Sun Times approached the church for a statement, if they wouldn't have given one. You know what I mean? But those two things, that double whammy in the media, I feel like they feel they do have to say things now. So keep up the good work. That's all I have to say. But yeah, I just don't think there's an understanding by the average person who's in leadership, and they just don't get it. And they're very focused on repentance. I think Arizona, that whole case showed us that it's all about the perpetrator and his repentance, his spirituality. What happened to the child, they'll figure that out. They'll go to counseling, whatever. They're just blind. They do not see it.
Can I say that even if that understanding were correct about he had assaulted a girl, and so he's going to make him in the young men's presidency, even if that were correct, isn't there something about being in the young men's presidency that gives you heightened access to the young women?
Exactly.
I mean, they never do any joint activities.
Yeah.
Right? It's just crazy to me. Okay. Anyway, that's that story. I'm afraid I spent almost an hour on it. I think it's an important story, but I apologize. And I want everybody here, that means you two, Rebecca and Bill, to go through your stories and not skip anything. So here's the next story we have. Whose is this?
This is mine. Just a little palate cleanser in between two stories about abuse. I know we have a lot of hard things to cover, but this was kind of interesting, and it's not very long. So over the weekend, there was an apparent break-in and the spreading of a white substance at an LDS meeting house in Utah, which prompted an investigation. This is in Quorum. I've been in this meeting house before, and apparently the congregants showed up on Sunday morning. This is just yesterday. And they went into the building, and there was white something, some kind of powder, something, and all kinds of on the carpet in the church. And they were concerned. They noticed that there might have been a window that was open. And so they definitely thought break in, and they sent everybody home, and they called, first responders, whatever, to come in and look at the substance and see if it was dangerous. Now, when I first read this, I thought, oh, they got to go home, because that never happened to me when I was a kid. It happened once, and that was Mount St. Helens. I don't know if you guys remember that, May 18th, 1980. And that was on a Sunday, and I was in church, and the bishop's wife came running down the aisle saying, the mountain's blown, everybody go home. I was so thrilled, because I never got to miss church for any reason, but Mount St. Helens, cataclysmic event, I got to go home. So I did feel excited for the kids that were probably really happy to go home. But interestingly, the article today now is there turned out to be no break-in, no vandalism, instead wet spots from a malfunctioning fire sprinkler, according to the LDS church spokesman, is what caused these stains. And I had my co-host Landon look this up, because he deals with facilities and embassies all around the world, and he says that there's like a buildup in sprinkler systems in buildings. It's called calcium magnesium carbonate, or perhaps zinc oxide, from the galvanized pipes. So if there's a drip or water comes out by accident, that residue can be on the carpet. So that's his guess as far as what it is. But the church has said just wet spots on the carpet. So I actually wondered, could it be people that were, lay people cleaning the church on Saturday, maybe left some cleaning product in the hallways, didn't vacuum it up good enough. But the bottom line is no vandalism, no break-in this time. And the kids got to go home and have a little break. Any thoughts on that?
I was hoping for anthrax. How about you, Bill?
Oh gosh.
No, I'm just glad it was nothing serious,
Yeah.
and that this group of congregants can get back to going to church the next Sunday here.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that with us, Rebecca. The next story, I think, is Bill's.
It is. So this showed up in the news this week. Ruby Franke children plead with Utah lawmakers to reconsider Gavin's bill. So two of Ruby Franke's children, Russell and Eve Franke, who survived the horrific abuse case involving their mother and counselor Jodi Hildebrandt, are now speaking out publicly to Utah lawmakers. In an interview with investigators and reporters, they urged legislators to reconsider Gavin's bill, a proposed child welfare measure that failed in the Utah House during the final days of the legislative session. The bill was designed to give child welfare workers and law enforcement more authority to physically check on children when serious safety concerns are reported, but parents refuse access to the home. The Franke children say that kind of authority might have changed their story. According to them, police and the Division of Child and Family Services repeatedly knocked on the door during welfare checks, but were never allowed inside, leaving the abuse hidden behind closed doors. They said the only reason they survived was because a brother eventually escaped and sought help. For them, the failure of the bill is frustrating because it leaves the same loophole in place that allowed their abuse to continue unchecked for months. So you have this situation where law enforcement and child welfare authorities are showing up at their door knocking because somebody has expressed concerns. But because the way the law is set up, if the parents do not grant permission to enter the home, then some greater amount of authority, permission, legal process needs to take place for someone to be able to enter the home. And they, along with others, were fighting for legislation that would reduce that amount of due process so that authorities could get into homes quicker if there was serious issues. And they believe that this would have helped them if such a thing existed. But as of right now, the Utah House has had that measure fail. So we will see where this goes. Any thoughts from you guys? I know, RFM, you being in law and seeing cases like this, the due process of those sort of work themselves out. I'd love to know both of your thoughts, but specifically you in regards to your profession. Where do we draw the line on people getting the benefit of the doubt, innocent until proven guilty, and that there has to be a certain amount of just cause? And then on the other hand, we could literally rescue more kids from things like this if people could get into the home sooner.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you can rescue all kids as long as the state monitors your homes 24/7.
Right.
I'm not sure how things are in Utah, honestly. I will tell you that up here in Washington, police's job is two things: to serve and protect. All right. Protect, usually talking about the enforcement of laws, but also to serve and help people out, which is why if police go into a house, okay, and they don't have a warrant, but they're there because they have probable cause to believe that somebody inside the house needs help or medical care, all right? It's called a welfare check. Then they're permitted to go inside a house. If they have probable cause to go inside a house, they can go inside a house and check it, okay, to see if anybody needs any help. And that is an exception to the warrant requirement. So I'm not sure how that fits in here with this whole situation. The question then that raises to my mind is, are they talking about anonymous reports? If you have a witness who comes forward and identifies themselves and gives you evidence, facts that would support probable cause that somebody in the house needs help, police can take that and go in. So are we talking about identified witnesses who don't give enough for probable cause, or just generic concerns or guesses, or somebody who is not identifying themselves, who is giving facts sufficient for probable cause, except for the fact that if it's an anonymous person, then that creates its own issues. Because the law actually does recognize the fact that sometimes people who are anonymous make accusations to the police just to get back at somebody, and their anonymity helps them do that. And therefore, you need additional indicia of their reliability that what they're saying is true. I'm probably getting in the weeds, and I apologize for that. What I'm saying is I'm not sure what this is supposed to address, because I think that if there's enough people who are against it, they probably have a reason for it. And it's not because they hate kids. It's probably because, and I'm guessing here, and I apologize, not my story, but I'm guessing that this has to do with something like anonymous reports. You know, we want to go into your house based on an anonymous report. Well, hold on, not so fast there. And yet, like I say, the other end of it is, yeah, you can save all kids by having the government monitor every room of every house 24/7 with cameras, just like you can get rid of all vehicle deaths on the highway by outlawing cars and not allowing people to drive. So at some point, I think we all understand that the extremes are not where we want to live on either side. And what we're trying to do is figure out where in the middle most people can agree on.
Yeah, great point. Rebecca, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this particular case, if I remember, the oldest daughter, so not anonymous, someone who was aware of the behavior of the mother and what it was like in the home, was trying to tell the police, there's something happening in the home. My brothers and sisters are in danger. And I think they went many, many times to the home. And for whatever reason, they were not able to get inside and really see what was going on. And then if you remember, the children were moved, right? They were moved to southern Utah, and they were in the process of being moved to Arizona, where I think they would have been off the grid. And we all fear probably a Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow scenario. So I understand your point, RFM, and we'd probably have to know more about what this bill was. But I think the bigger picture, which is wonderful, is that these kids they have a voice. They have a place that they're coming from where they're very poised to be able to make a huge difference going forward in all of this kind of thing. I compare it to Elizabeth Smart, who suddenly has found this incredible voice and is putting out videos about purity culture and all that. You know, she's uniquely poised to be able to speak on this with authority, and nobody can reproach anything she says. And I think that the Franke kids are in that position too. And as they get older and move along, I hope to see a lot from them as they're trying to help legislature or whatever to protect children, you know, and maybe it'll be healing for them to be involved in these kinds of scenarios. So whether or not this bill is something, like you said, RFM, that we really understand, I hope going forward that they'll keep doing this because they're uniquely poised. It's a Mormon moment, right? They are Mormon kids, just like Elizabeth Smart is Mormon, and they're all talking about things that are wrong that need to be addressed. And so I think it's really important.
Very good. And now we have another story. I think this one is from you, Rebecca.
This is mine. I'm going to do a book talk. That's right. I have the book. It's pretty thick here. There is a new book out by Eliza Roxy Snow. Did you guys know that her middle name is Roxy?
She's written a new book.
Well, it's a book of her writings. We'll explain it. But actually, Roxy, sometimes it's spelled Roxcy. But to me, Roxy, that's an awesome middle name. I mean, and I was shocked. I did not know that the R stood for Roxy. And it reminds me, like, if I were to find out that, say, Sherry Dew's middle name was Bambi or something, it's amazing to me, you know, Sherry Bambi Dew, something like that. Anyway, this is a new book. It's a compilation, of course, of her different writings. And it says that an accomplished public speaker, Snow delivered nearly 1,300 recorded discourses between 1840 and 1887 throughout Utah and Idaho. She spoke on all kinds of topics, church doctrine, really a champion of women, or so they would like to portray her as in this book. And a lot of her discourses, 1,300, right? So they've curated and they've chosen 52 here. And some really smart people at the church museum and church history library have been looking through things and putting this together in this compilation. So I'm curious to go through it. But there was another issue that I thought was more fascinating, even than that this book is coming out now. And that is that the book says it's called Rise Up and Speak, Selected Discourses of Eliza R. Snow. And I'm sure you guys have seen a couple little shorts that I've put out about this. And my question is, what is in a name? Because her full name, technically, as you can see, I put there on the book, that's AI, is Eliza R. Snow Smith Young. And I've always wondered what it would be like to refer to her with that name in Relief Society. I've never done it, but I'd like to try. If you go to Wikipedia, right up front, first couple lines, it says, one of the many wives of Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young after Smith's death, 3 months, little over 3 months after Joseph Smith was murdered, she marries Brigham Young. So it's right here in the forefront on Wikipedia, if anybody wants to look it up. And of course, I have an AI generated image of Eliza R. standing in between Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. There they are. But I was really curious if anybody else knew this. I didn't really realize it till I was an adult. And so I kind of made an informal poll. I made it on Ex-Mormon Reddit, Mormon Stories podcast, some other places. And I said, informal poll, as a member of the LDS Church, how many of you knew that Eliza R. Snow was married to Joseph Smith and to Brigham Young after Joseph's death? And if you did not know this, how or when did you find out? And so before we go on with the slides, I will ask you guys, RFM first, did you always know since you joined the church that Eliza R. Snow was married to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young? And then you can answer too, Bill.
Well, your last sentence says, if you did not know this, how or when did you find out? I would guess the answer for that would be right now. If you did not know it, you're finding it out right now, right?
Well, no, if you didn't know it, like growing up in the church, kind of, if you didn't kind of always know it, like you always knew that Emma was Joseph's wife, right? But if you didn't know that Eliza R. Snow had anything to do with it, when did you find out? It might not be worded quite right, but most people understood. Some people wrote down today. I learned it from you just now. Other people said not till I deconstructed. What about you, RFM?
I could not tell you when. I could not tell you. I mean, first off, I got to find out that she was married to Joseph Smith, and the church isn't freely admitting that, except today, and it's not that freely.
Exactly.
And then you have to find out that she was married to Brigham Young. I think more people know that she was married to Brigham Young than Joseph Smith. I probably found it out in that order.
Yeah, I think so. What about you, Bill? Did you kind of always know, or was it, some people described it as an aha moment? Oh my gosh, when I figured that out, it really hit me over the head.
Yeah, I can't pinpoint a moment. I would say I definitely didn't learn it in the first few years of my time in the church. When I did learn it, it would have been before the 2014 gospel topic essay on Joseph Smith's polygamy. I knew who those wives were before that moment, but I definitely didn't learn it from church sources, from correlated curriculum. It would have been from studying Mormon apologetics and reading up on the criticisms that people have of the church.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, go ahead.
I was just agreeing with Bill.
Yeah, no, it is really fascinating. And does it matter? I mean, I've talked to other people who said it does matter to me because I thought she was a, unmarried spinster kind of lady. She was a spinster and she was out there doing all this stuff, and she was, but she wasn't. And she was married to Joseph Smith while she was friends with Emma. We all know all these other details, and it's just not out there as clearly as it should be. I was very curious in this book if they would mention that. I felt like they had to. So it's the reason that I special ordered the book and got it rushed here before the newscast. And there's an introduction that's several pages long. I skimmed it. I didn't see a mention. I sent it over to our good friend and researcher, Ron Jorgensen. I said, can you find any mention of Joseph Smith, as a husband, or Brigham Young in this? And he put it through some textual analysis software, and he did come up with one little place where it mentions married for time and eternity as a plural wife to Joseph, and then married for time only to Brigham. So it certainly isn't a piece of her story, a part of her story. It's just kind of mentioned in passing. So the idea of her name and her name being called Smith, a lot of people said, well, she never wanted to go by Smith and she never wanted to go by Young. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And so Ron Jorgensen and I wanted to kind of document this and look into it. Did she ever want to go by the name Smith? Was it ever important to her? Because I feel like if it was, if she used it herself, it should probably be on her book, right? It should probably be used by the church today. So we were able to find quite a number of things. And interestingly, Emma died in 79. And it was in 1880 that Eliza started to really embrace going by Smith. And I have a few examples here that we'll go through. The first here on the left is an affidavit where she says that she was married to Joseph Smith in 42, and it is signed Eliza R. Snow Smith. That's her own signature. That's her own affidavit that she wrote saying, yes, he was my husband, right? So if you go to the next picture on this, I had to put this all together because I thought this was so fascinating. This is an article in some kind of periodical. She's listed as Eliza R. Snow Smith, and she says, Joseph Smith, my beloved husband, the choice of my heart, the crown of my head. She goes on at length about Joseph, right? Again, this is after Emma has passed away, but she does call him her beloved husband. And some other very nice things. Yes.
Is that the one that's from the periodical named The Women's Exponent?
Yeah. You can see the little note down there underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah. August 1st, 1886.
Yep.
I want to make sure people know where they could find it. Past and present is the name of the article.
Yep. And you can freeze on this if you want to go and look any of these up. But, to me and to Ron Jorgensen, as we researched this, it seemed like she really did want to take on and be known as Sister Smith after that time period. And of course, Brigham Young had passed away too already, even before Emma. And so, she just seemed to gravitate toward that. Ron was able to pull these together. These are from the church site, research everywhere. She calls herself Eliza R. Smith, Sister Smith, all over the place. Here's another book, The Life and, what does it say? The Life and, I can't even read that word, it's so light. What does that say? Labors. Okay, I was like, labors of Eliza R. Snow Smith. And again, my point is, I feel that the church should recognize the name that somebody wants to be known by. And it's pretty obvious to me that later in life, she did want to take on that Smith surname. Of course, the most telling thing to me, and I've been here before, is her tombstone, which says Eliza R. Snow Smith. So, it's just kind of an interesting little side note to history, but I wonder if there's a reason, again, that the LDS Church does not want to tack that Smith name onto the rest of her name, when it's so clear to me that at least at the end of her life, she definitely used that as her name, and indeed it was on her tombstone. So, final thoughts on Eliza Roxy Snow Smith Young. Bill first, and then RFM.
I think it is progress for the church to start talking about these women, to publish their accounts, the things that they taught and said. In this instance, I think it's done to give a more prominent role to the words of women in the church. But I also think that no member should go through their, let's say, first 10 years in the church without being able to figure out that Mary Elizabeth Rawlings Lightner not only saved the Book of Commandments, but was a plural wife of Joseph Smith. And I think the church hopefully will do and continue to do a better job of publishing the life and writings and the biographies of these women.
I think it's clear the church does not want to buy trouble here, so they just have her name as Eliza R. Snow, which is basically her maiden name. And it appears that she valued Smith over Young. I mean, Smith, half the valley was married to Brigham Young, but to be married to Joseph Smith, who was the special one, he was the prophet, capital T, capital P, of this dispensation. To be married to him is what really, in that view, gave women increased status, and what made her so desirable, I think, to Brigham Young as a wife.
Yeah, I think so too. And as she said, my beloved husband, Joseph, she was right there with him the whole time, and more of a kind of a confidant. And, she was sort of elevated in, working with the brethren and, writing, and they seemed to take her fairly seriously, but, she was a plural wife. So there is all of that. Pretty interesting. Everybody go get the book if you want to read 52 of her highly curated discourses.
Highly curated, huh?
Well, out of 1,300, they chose 52.
Oh, I thought maybe they highly curated the 52 as well.
They probably did. I don't know. I think pretty much anything from the church is highly curated, but that's just me and my conspiracy-minded brain. So
The next story is update from BYU, the admissions boo-boo scandal.
Yep, and it's me again. We'll quickly go through this update. You remember how last week we reported that they sent out letters to 9 students saying you made it into the school, and then, the students themselves had to kind of get on the portal, try to apply, try to find roommates, and found out that that was not indeed the case. They had not been admitted to BYU. And these are some of the headlines: completely heartbroken. BYU apologizes. And that's where we were at last week. They were saying sorry, but there was no indication that they were going to do anything. And there was one particular family that took to the news, with statements and pictures of their son standing in his bedroom saying, "I'm really upset," and the parents were like, "We're upset too." So I did not know this, and this was not widely reported that I could find in mainstream media here in Utah, but I did find it in the Daily Universe. There was a protest about this. You can see it right here. 9 students, let them in, right? So it says a group of BYU students started protesting that same day outside the Wilkinson Student Center, although did not continue as BYU security notified them that they needed a permit. So I think it was a very short-lived protest, but they did take to the streets to tell people, this is not fair. These people are heartbroken. They put out some flyers, say heartbreaking, we've got to do something. Then security kind of shut them down. But I think there was some, publicity around it. And of course, BYU, very sensitive to that. Here's a picture of our lovely young man there in his room. We showed this before. Somebody who did not get in and was heartbroken over it. There he is.
I wanted to ask you a question, Bill. Can I ask you a question real quick? What do Kleenex, Jergens, and Tom Selleck have in common?
I would not want to be the young man who's got that, even if it's for innocent reasons, that you get an upside down Jergens lotion bottle.
Jergens. It's not called Jerkins.
Whatever you say.
Okay, shut it down. No.
and then a scantily clad Tom Selleck, who, for all intents and purposes, looks naked up there.
Yeah,
I was just going to say the answer to the question was there. You can find them all in this picture, but
yeah, well, it's a mystery that people have been trying to discuss as they, of course, talk about this young man's dilemma, and then they do just wonder about the proximity of these 2 items and the picture. So just know that people are discussing it, trying to figure out what's going on. So anyway, then, the students and the members of the community are split. Some say mistakes happen, get over it. Others say this is too heartbreaking and too much, let them in. And there was even a petition, right? Sign our petition to get them back in. BYU students love to protest, the things that they can, because they're not allowed to protest a lot. And the student who started the petition just kind of put herself in the place of the students and said, this just would have been intolerable, too devastating. And then suddenly, the announcement comes out that they're going to let those 9 students in. Now, we did talk last week about how other universities had accidentally sent letters to 1,000 students, 200,000 students. I doubt those universities probably would do this, but these are 9 kids. And so they did. They let them in provisionally on their freshman first semester. They have to get a 3.0. In order to stay, and then they'll be admitted officially. And so they're working with the students, to make sure that they're going to be successful and be able to be a true blue cougar. And this is a picture of the young man that was in all the news stories, his wonderful family. They had also made statements, and they are just thrilled. And I said, families and students are thrilled. Hand them a Kleenex. They are crying tears of joy, right?
Stop with the Kleenex jokes already, Rebecca. I think that's in bad taste.
I just had to make one. And, they are so happy. But do you know who else is happy? It's Tom Selleck. Way to go, guys. You did the right thing. There it is. And that's the end of my story. Any final thoughts before we move to the next story? RFM, Bill?
Is that a real picture of Tom Selleck?
That's a real picture. Yeah. I looked up the picture on the kid's mantle. And
I don't think I'd seen this one before. This is the one that was on the mantle?
No, this is not the same one, although I feel like it might have been taken the same day. I was able to find that picture, and it's kind of more of a full body, kind of goes down to the waist. And he is side view, chest and everything. And then this is another one. Apparently he did several of these. It might have been a calendar. I don't know. I'm not saying if I had it or didn't have it, but
he's a fine looking man. I'm going to get my Kleenex over here.
That's right. Tom Selleck, Magnum PI. So anyway, good news for those students, and BYU not only apologized, but they kind of, took care of the issue. So that you don't see that all the time from the LDS Church proper, but BYU did do it. Back to you,
There you
Arfan.
go. Thank you. Thank you. They really took care of the issue, didn't they, Rebecca?
They did.
Now we have something in purple, and I think this is Bill. Your story, is that right?
Yeah. So there's two articles here that we'll go into. The first one here is Salt Lake Tribune, how the study of Mormon history has changed. Quote, and this comes from Richard Bushman. We have learned to face up to our facts and to be very candid, unquote. Let's see if that's true. Richard Bushman, one of the most influential historians of Mormonism, says the way Latter-day Saints talk about their own history has changed dramatically over the past few decades. And I think that's true. But let's see if what he says about what those changes are, if they hold up. For much of the 20th century, the church has told a clean and faith-promoting narrative that avoided uncomfortable facts. Today, Bushman says the trend among historians, and even within the church itself, is to confront the complicated parts of the story more openly. In his view, the field has moved toward acknowledging that the past is messy and that serious history requires wrestling with that complexity rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Bushman, best known for writing Joseph Smith Rough Stone Rolling, argues that understanding Mormon history means accepting that people who built the movement were deeply human. Leaders including Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and others made mistakes and had flaws. In other words, they're fallible. But Bushman maintains that those imperfections do not erase what they accomplished or the religious movement they created, though I would argue such also doesn't make the religion true, and mounds of evidence stand against such claims. Bushman sees the story of Mormonism as powerful, even when founders and leaders fall short, when its founders and leaders fall short of perfection. This shift Bushman describes does in fact show a growing effort among scholars and some church leaders to encourage members to begin to face historical realities rather than avoid them. Instead of hiding controversial parts of history and changes in the doctrine, the newer approach attempts to contextualize them faithfully through carefully crafted apologetics and incorporate them into a more mature understanding of the faith's origin and development. Now, this idea is that faith can survive, perhaps even deepen, when believers learn the full story rather than the simplified one, but such doesn't seem to be the case, as we've gone over recently. Continual talks by leaders, including Elder Oaks, on doubt and addressing those who leave, or on the perspective of statisticians outside the church, who in multiple places point to dramatic loss in membership across much of the globe. Now, there was an article that you guys, we shared here in the text group with us as we plan around the newscast, that the church had released in its periodical. I don't know if they're calling it the Ensign or the Liahona. They switch the names every so often. I think it's the Liahona at present. But the title of the article is Faithfulness and Prophets, Past and Present, by our good friend, Elder Ahmad Corbett. So while historians like Bushman are saying Mormonism is learning to face its past honestly, on the other hand, official church messaging still often pushes members in the opposite. Let's go ahead. Sorry about that. Still often pushes members in the opposite direction. Don't dwell too much on the past. Don't scrutinize leaders too closely. And be careful not to question prophetic authority. And that paradox becomes crystal clear in a recent church article that we just mentioned that gives members guidance on how they should think about the imperfections of past prophets. In a January 2026 Liahona article titled Faithfulness and Prophets, Past and Present, Elder Ahmad Corbett argues that members should resist the temptation to criticize or condemn past prophets when troubling historical issues arise. The article encourages readers to focus on the spiritual teachings of prophets rather than on their mistakes. It emphasizes that prophets are human and imperfect, but still divinely called, and that dwelling on their flaws can weaken faith and unity within the church. But what if those flaws strike definitively at the truth claims of the faith? Shouldn't the church be vulnerable about creating transparency and safety for people to examine just how deeply the faith's claims are affected by such flaws by its leaders? And you'll see here the section on the right that I'm really speaking to. There's a part of this article that is titled "Avoid the Temptation to Exceed Our Authority." Notice he puts himself in the group of those who can't be questioned. I can't hear you, RFM. I can't hear you, RFM.
Because you have to arrive at a certain level of authority before you can speak the truth about the church of which you are a member.
Right. And he's in the club, and you, I, and everyone else at the local level is not. So a central theme of the article is the idea that members should approach church history with humility rather than judgment. It quotes the Book of Mormon passage, "Condemn me not because of mine imperfection," and suggests that discovering the flaws of earlier leaders should lead to gratitude and learning, not criticism. The message is essentially that imperfections exist for our instruction, but the proper response is to move forward in faith and focus on the teachings of living prophets rather than revisiting the mistakes of past ones. Of course, living prophets will have made what we will then deem future mistakes, but then there'll be past mistakes when we talk about them, so we have to move on from those ones too. The problem with this framing, and I'll just note this, it shows up most clearly in the section titled "Avoid the Temptation to Exceed Our Authority." The idea there is that ordinary members don't have the authority or perspective to judge prophetic decisions, right along with what you said, RFM, especially those made in different historical context. But the practical effect of this logic is that it discourages honest evaluation of harmful teachings or actions. If members are told they lack the authority to examine the past critically, then accountability becomes almost impossible. History becomes something to learn from only in ways that preserve the institution's authority and never with a focus to find the truth, if such runs counter to the faith's narrative. Historians like Bushman say we need to face the full story, while institutional messaging still nudges members to look away from the parts that might challenge the faith's leaders. One approach, Bushman's, treats history as something to examine honestly. The other, namely Corbett and the other leaders of the church, treat it as something to handle carefully so that faith remains intact. Thoughts from the two of you on the juxtaposition of Richard Bushman saying that we now as a church are dealing with our history honestly, juxtaposed up against Corbett, who says, whatever you do, don't examine the prophets too closely with an eye to hold them accountable to their mistakes. Rebecca?
Yeah, I think they are saying, okay, there are some, they don't say problems. What do they call them? Issues, situations with history. Yeah, but they're not going to really say what those are. They're just out there kind of lurking like a shark under the water, right? They're just there. And as we saw from President Oaks, what you do is you wait it out. You just wait. The Lord is going to clarify all of this. If there's anything that just doesn't sit right with you, it doesn't seem to fit. He specifically called out science because that's something that's coming up over and over again recently. But you just wait. You wouldn't want to get off the boat now when God is going to reveal something pretty soon that's going to have everything fit together. The historical issues from the past, scientific issues, everything is going to be seamlessly tied up together. So don't leave now. So I see that they say there are problems, don't look at them and just wait it out. That's one thing. The other thing that they always focus on are your feelings. I saw a short the other day from one of the notable apologist podcasters, and she said, I had a faith crisis. Well, of course I tuned in. I mean, who doesn't want to hear about that, right? It was something in the past, and she talked about struggling and thinking and wondering, and then she went to church and she walked in, she heard the music, She felt the feels, and the faith crisis was over. You just need to feel. As long as you feel okay about it and you don't look too closely, you're aware they're there. You know all the stuff. Don't try to talk to me, post-Mormon. I know the stuff, but I'm going to wait for God to reveal, and I'm going to feel the feels, and I'm okay. And I think that's a perfect formula that really works well for a lot of people. You're not ignoring things. You know there's something, but you don't specifically know what it is, and you've been told how to handle it. So Bushman, little idealistic, I think, in saying, we need to delve into the issues. He knows the issues. He wrote the book on the issues, right? For a lot of people. But I think the real thing that they're trying to say is what Corbett is saying. And that is just, don't look too hard and feel okay. And you're going to be all right. Just keep your butt in the seat.
I can't hear you.
Well, this was no boating accident, and that was no faith crisis. And I don't know what this Corbett character thinks he's doing, but he is making himself into a moron defending the church. You give up your ethics defending the church. He's a lawyer. I'm not going to say anything about his ethics, but this argument does not hold together. What he's saying is this, okay? What he's saying is nobody gets to criticize the leaders. That's what he's saying. You members don't get to criticize the leaders. By that, I'm talking about the apostles, okay? The 15, the top ones. And even middle-level management, like he is, doesn't get to criticize the leaders. And even the leaders don't get to criticize the leaders. The only person who can criticize the leaders is God, and the Mormon leaders tell you what God says. So that's how much sense his argument makes.
Yeah, little to none. Well, that's it for me.
Okay, really good. Thank you for that, Bill. We've got another story here as we're rounding the clubhouse turn. Is this one yours, Rebecca, or Bill?
Well, of course, because it's about Easter and Holy Week. It's always me. You're not going to hear the end of it until after April 6th. Then I'll probably stop talking, but maybe not, maybe a little later. So anyway, something absolutely incredible happened in Utah. And that is this article says poised to pass this bill that makes Good Friday a state holiday, but it did pass incredibly. And at first it was going to be the whole day. They were trying to get that passed, and there was a lot of pushback. And of course, by a state holiday, this means that state employees get a paid day off. So in the 11th hour, it didn't look like it was going to pass. So they changed it to be half a paid day off so that people can go and celebrate Good Friday. And again, I saw an apologist podcast where somebody said, oh my goodness, we're so excited. We've been wishing for this day. And I kind of said, have you really even known what Good Friday is? I mean, I just question this. There are only 13 other states that have this or maybe 12, and this makes the 13th as a state holiday. So it's pretty incredible to me that Utah is passing this. It just shows that, I don't know, they're moving again toward mainstream Christianity. They want to appear mainstream Christian. Have you guys heard about this? And what are your thoughts on the fact that Utah now is going to celebrate Good Friday? Bill, what do you think?
We talked about this last week.
Yep.
I'm watching Mormonism change so fast that even as a critic, I can't keep up. And I can only imagine what the believer is feeling, not knowing the full scope of how much change has happened and seeing their church take on things like the cross to some degree, Good Friday, Lent. It's sort of bewildering, and I have to imagine it's even more so for them.
RFM, what do you think?
I'm against state holidays and federal holidays in principle.
Of course you
And
are.
especially when they start adding things. Okay, look, if you come up with another idea, okay, switch something out. Because what you're doing is you're charging taxpayers, you're forcing taxpayers to pay for government workers who are not working. You're having to pay people to not work. Now they make it 4 hours, which is apparently what's going to happen. So you have to have 2 workers before it's 1 full day. But that's going to be plenty. Now look at this bottom line in that paragraph. Did you read that where it says Stratton said before the measure's final passage that he hopes this bill fosters goodwill for Utahns? That's what this is all about. He's actually saying it. He wants it to foster goodwill for Utahns, and you taxpayers are going to be paying through the nose for it, and encourages more religious dialogue across the state. I'm glad that that's the business of the government, okay? And charging the, here's what they end up doing. This is a vanity project for the church. So what they're doing is all the non-members in Utah who are taxpayers have to pay in order for the church to pretend to be Christians.
Wow. Once again, RFM tells it like it is, throws a wet blanket on the whole thing. And somebody reminded me in the chat, it is not celebrate, it's observe Good Friday. Observe it because, this is the day of the crucifixion. And all over everywhere else, I haven't seen this in Salt Lake as much or at all. These pictures here on the right are maybe what Salt Lake is in for. I mean, they are doing full-on pageants. They have Roman centurions. They have a cross. They have Jesus dragging it through the city streets. I predict this is what's going to start happening here in Utah. Here are some more. These are just pictures from different places in the U.S. last year. This is the kind of thing that they do. And I thought one comment was really interesting in this article where the person who put the bill up and it passed said God was really sterilized from our public dialogue in many ways. The Quorum Republican said, so it's been a blessing to open up in a new way the opportunity to more comfortably, appropriately, and certainly with sensitivity welcome God back to the public sector. Because that's what we should do. Welcome God back to the public sector. But I did look into this. Had they ever tried to pass this before? Because, of course, my theory is since 2022 is when the church is making this huge push to appear more mainstream Christian. And as Bill pointed out, introducing all these elements that none of us have ever heard of before, never celebrated. In fact, if we're old enough like me, they were false traditions of the apostasy. You absolutely, look, I'm holding a seer stone. I just picked it up. That's funny. So I did look into it in the past, and last year they tried, and instead they just passed some holy days, kind of not state holidays, but they were recognized as a certain religious day. So I just want to remind everybody, again, I'm going to put this up every week, that in the church handbook, it clearly says we do not follow Holy Week. Good Friday is part of Holy Week. Palm Sunday is part of Holy Week. We do not follow it. I can't believe after, I think this is the third year that I'm bringing this up every year, that they have not removed this, because it clearly said this. And I had to make this meme where you have two LDS couples talking, and one says, what's Good Friday again? And the other one says, well, I'm not sure, but it will make us look more Christian if we act excited about it. That's kind of how I feel about Good Friday. So we'll see what happens. If anybody takes to the streets in, a loincloth carrying a cross, text me if you see it.
I feel like the SCMC is falling down on the job, because you have mentioned this 3 times now, and they have not taken the step of notifying the appropriate people to get this changed. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah.
We've hit on this before. When did Christianity accept the celebrations of these days, these occurrences? And as you guys have pointed out, this is the great apostasy.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the great apostasy.
Yeah.
The Mormon church is now embracing the great apostasy it invaded against when I joined the church.
Yeah. The great apostasy is cool again.
That make the great apostasy great again. And it's almost like the restoration is now a horseshoe, right? We restored it, or Joseph restored it, to put aside all of these things, false traditions of the great apostasy, right? But now we've done a curve, and we are returning back to the things that we were restored against or beyond in the first place. So it must be extremely confusing. But like we learned in Bill's segment, you just say, you know what, I'm going to roll with it. I feel good about it. And, God will reveal more. So nobody's really complaining. I do feel that people are rolling in their graves, though. I always had this litmus test of my parents. And I absolutely know they would be horrified if they looked out their window and saw an LDS ward dragging a cross down the street. Even waving palm fronds would have horrified them, because they really believed anything Catholic or anything like that was of the apostasy. So
the Mormon church is actually playing out what it said the original church established by Christ did 2,000 years ago. Yep. It's really amazing to watch.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And now we have this story about the new pictures of the apostles. Yeah. Is that you, Rebecca?
Yeah, it's just the last little slide. I wanted to draw attention to this because it's a big deal when a new kid is on the block. As you mentioned, RFM, there's a new kid in the yearbook, and it's Elder Gilbert, right? And so I did put their pictures in a yearbook. Maybe you can't see them too clearly, but I did circle Bednar and I did circle Gilbert, and I said, You know how in a yearbook they'll say most likely to do this, most likely to do that? I put in most likely to head a $1 trillion corporation with a religious arm 2040 to 2070, because I feel they're uniquely poised as the youngest members that this is going to happen somewhere within that date range. So
Very
new
good.
picture, check it out. There it is.
It's like Juan Epstein in Welcome Back, Kotter, who was voted most likely to take a life.
Exactly. Yep.
You want the next slide here? On the radar. So we've got some things coming up on the radar. It's Monday night, as I mentioned before. Tomorrow night's Tuesday. That means Mormonish. What's on with Mormonish, Rebecca?
Yep, Mormonish always follows the newscast the next night, and that is going to be Tuesday night, the 10th. And we have a familiar face, Dr. Thomas Murphy. I love this new picture. I said, do you have a new picture, Thomas, to put on the slide? He's like, here it is. I just think he looks fantastic. He has put out some new content. He has an article that's been out, and a lot of people have been talking about it. You guys have talked to him. The amazing thing about this article is there's so much to it. He basically takes kind of a different skew or point of view or side topic from his article to every podcast he's on. So if you think I've seen this, you haven't seen this. This is a really great conversation, and we're calling it Whitewashed, the Iroquois and the Book of Mormon. So it's going to be really, really great conversation. I have my sometimes co-host Unoriginal Jim on with me for this one, and that's tomorrow night, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So everybody tune in.
Very good. Thank you. On Mormonism Live this Wednesday, we're going to have a very special guest on. It's going to be Sam Young. Yes, we're bringing him back. We know that Sam is a legend, and that because it's been a while since he's been in the public light, it's been a number of years, there's actually a lot of people in the audience who probably have never even heard of him. But we're going to review his history, what he did, what he accomplished. We're going to talk about some things that have not been talked about publicly before. And one of those things we're going to get is the down and dirty details of what happened at his excommunication hearing. That's going to be interesting, as well as other things. He's a wonderful guy. He's done some wonderful things. He actually impacted the church. He had to take a bullet and get excommunicated, but the church moved a little in the right direction as a result, without giving him any credit, of course. So that's going to be Mormonism Live Wednesday at 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. Then Mormonism After Dark with Radio Free Mormon will be this Friday. So that's going to be 8 o'clock p.m. and we're going to have a party. So dress up, bring something appropriate. If you want an adult beverage, you're going to have to bring your own, because I'm not sharing. And we'll have a good time there. And then there's something that Bill's doing.
Yeah, I'll just note we released last week an episode on the 116 pages of the Book of Lehi. It was based on a segment from the Thrive St. George session. And I will just note the one that comes out this Thursday is on the Book of Abraham. This will be a series of about 30 really short videos. They each last somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes each. This Thursday will be the Book of Abraham. And then next Thursday will be the Kinderhook plates. And the series will continue from there. These are already recorded. They're already in the queue. And they will show up to the public this Thursday and next, and each Thursday following with the episodes that are created thereafter. So that's part of a project I'm working on at the moment. And then RFM, you've got this.
Oh yeah, we did this Saturday night. We did it live. We had a huge party. Boy, it was a weekend full of parties. I'm still recovering. Truth Bombs. This was the big festival we had to commemorate and celebrate the end of the Light on Truth letter. And by the end of it, I mean the end of it. Because Colby Reddish, sorry, Colby. Oh my gosh. And I, and some other guests that have helped along the way, indispensably, with our review of this and decimation of this book, this letter, this Light on Truth letter, have been amazing. And it's been over a year. It's approaching a year and a half since we did our first episode on this. So it's something to be commemorated. We've covered all the chapters, all the arguments. Nothing remains except for Austin Fife in a loincloth. So that's that. It was a lot of fun. And we had Randy Bell show up, and also Diamond Dave from Outer Mongolia joined us as well and shared some very interesting insights, I think, on the whole process. Okay, so I think this is it. Taking that down. Any comments or announcements from either of you before I close this show out?
No, it was a great show. Good job, everybody.
Okay, really good. All right, everybody, please hit that like button before you go, which in English means everybody, please hit that like button before you go, and the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe now so you don't miss any of this fabulous content. And thank you so, by the way, this is streaming on 2 platforms on Mormon Discussions. If you're watching it on Mormon Discussions, hit the like and the subscribe here. And please go to Mormonish, which is the other channel, Rebecca's and Landon's, that it's streaming on right now. Hit the like button there and the subscribe button there if you would, okay? And vice versa. So thanks so much for watching. Make a donation if you can, and if you haven't yet, we'd appreciate it greatly, either at Mormonish or at Mormon Discussions. You pick. And we will see you next Monday at 6:00 p.m. for another episode of the Mormon Newscast. Good night.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.